Gennady Mikhasevich is a Soviet serial killer. In 1971 to 1985, according to the court verdict, he committed 36 murders of women and one attempted murder in Vitebsk, Polotsk and the surrounding countryside, as a result of which he received the nickname Vitebsk Strangler. The maniac himself confessed to 43 murders. For his crimes, 14 innocent people were convicted, one of whom was sentenced to death and shot, and the other was blinded in prison. Gennady Mikhasevich was born on April 7, 1947 in the village of Ist, now belonging to the Myersky district of the Vitebsk region. As a child, Gennady was a reserved and uncommunicative guy, for which he was often ridiculed by girls. Because of this, Mikhasevich acquired a sexual complex. In addition, his father suffered from alcohol addiction, and young Gennady watched almost daily how his father arranged scandals for his mother, which often ended in physical abuse from his father. Mikhasevich's friends knew about these cases and constantly mocked him. After school, the future murderer was drafted into the armed forces of the USSR and served in the Navy, but due to hepatitis he was soon commissioned, after which he returned to Belarus. Mikhasevich committed his first murder on the night of May 14, 1971 near the village of Ekimen, Polotsk district. According to him, at that time he was depressed about parting with his girlfriend and was looking for a secluded place to put a noose around his neck. Having accidentally met Ludmila Androlova, a 19-year-old local resident, he changed his intentions. "Why should I choke because of a woman? I'd rather strangle some myself," the maniac later said during the interrogation. Mikhasevich attacked Androlova, abused her and strangled her. Ludmila's body was discovered on May 16.
Hey, I'm not going to beat around the bush. You have to subscribe to the channel and like it so you don't miss new videos.
Initially, investigators assumed that she was the victim of a robbery, but the inspector of the Criminal Investigation Department of the Vitebsk Regional Executive Committee Boris Laparevich put forward a version about the appearance of a maniac in the Vitebsk region. The crime remained unsolved for more than a month, and Laparevich was withdrawn from his investigation. Subsequently, a certain Vlushikov was found guilty of murdering Androlova. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Mikhail Zavnarovic, an investigator on particularly important cases of the prosecutor's office of the Belarusian SSR, told Laparevich, "This is how you need to work, you need to be able to solve crimes." On the evening of October 29, 1971, on the outskirts of Vitebsk, Mikhasevich attacked another girl and tried to strangle her with a clothesline. The victim began to struggle, scream and bit through the attacker's arm. At that moment, she was heard by schoolchildren who went to the scream with a flashlight. Mikhasevich, realizing this, decided not to risk it, fled the scene of the crime and threw the weapon of the crime. The girl remained alive, and the evidence got into the hands of the investigation, a rope with the blood of the first group. However, on the same day, near the village of Ruba, he repeated his attack, as for the first time, and took the life of another girl, whose body was found the next morning. The episode of the attempted murder of a girl on the outskirts of Vitebsk was not considered by investigators at all, and the stranglehold found at the crime scene was thrown away, the version that the attack was committed by the same criminal who. He took the life of Ludmila Androlova, and an innocent man was convicted of the murder of Androlova. It was unprofitable for the investigation. Mikhasevich committed the third and fourth murders on April 15 and July 30, 1972 in the area of the Lukasa railway station on the outskirts of Vitebsk, the fifth in April 1973. In 1975, Mikhasevich killed 2 more women in the Polotsk district. A witness to the murder committed on July 30, 1972, testified that she saw 3 young men with a shepherd dog near the crime scene. Soon 3 people were arrested in the suburbs of Vitebsk: Valery Kovalev, Nikolai Yanchenko and Vladimir Pashkovich, who were walking with a shepherd puppy. The only clue was a picture of this puppy. During the confrontation between Kovalev, Yanchenko and Pashkovich, which was conducted by Mikhail Zavnarovic, they got confused in their testimony. At the same time, Zavnarovic threatened them with the death penalty if they did not confess to the murder. Under the pressure of the investigation, Kovalev and Yanchenko confessed, and Pashkovich resisted to the last. All 3 were found guilty of murder. Kovalev was sentenced to 15 years in prison, Pashkovich to 12 years, Yanchenko to 2.5 years in prison. Outwardly, Gennady Mikhasevich lived an ordinary life. In June 1973, he graduated from the Gorodok Technical School of Agricultural Mechanization, returned to the village of East and began working as an auto mechanic at the Disney State Farm. On April 28, 1976, Mikhasevich went to work as a master adjuster of repair shops in the Dvina breeding farm in the Polotsk district. In May of the same year, he married a saleswoman and moved to the village of Soloniki. After that, Mikhasevich killed 4 women in the area between Polotsk and Novopolotsk from 1976 to 1978. 3 of the 4 victims were abused by the killer. In 1979 and 1980, Mikhasevich killed 1 woman each. The second of these murders he committed in the same area between Polotsk and Novopolotsk, where he had previously committed 4 murders. In 1981, the criminal purchased a red Zaporozhets passenger car, and also gained access to a State Farm vehicle, technical assistance. Since this year, the maniac has chosen a new tactic for committing murders. In various districts of the Vitebsk region, he began to lure girls and women into his car who were standing near the road and asked for a ride. In 1981, Mikhasevich killed 3 women, in the summer of 1982 5 women, in 1983, another, who became his 22nd victim. In 1984, a maniac killed 12 women. The maniac committed most of the crimes on the highways between Vitebsk, Polotsk and Lepel. The killer had a reputation as a good worker, an exemplary family man and an active participant in public life. He had 2 children, he was a member of the CPSU, was the commander of the People's Squad and the secretary of the grassroots party organization, led a healthy lifestyle. A total of 14 innocent people were convicted of Mikhasevich's crimes. One of them, Nikolai Terenya, was sentenced to death and shot. The other, Oleg Adamov, was sentenced to 15 years in prison. The third, Vladimir Gorly, went blind in prison. Law enforcement officers resorted to torturing the defendants, tampering with evidence. For example, a photo of a woman allegedly killed by him was planted in Oleg Adamov's apartment. Most of the investigators did not search for a serial killer, because in the Soviet society of the 1970s and the first half of the 1980s it was not customary to talk about the presence of serial killers, which were considered a characteristic feature of capitalist countries. In addition, the investigating authorities were pressured by the authorities interested in high crime detection rates. The ongoing killings caused dissatisfaction with the activities of law enforcement agencies and a drop in the level of confidence in them on the part of the population of the region. The crimes that occurred were overgrown with speculation and rumors. Women were afraid to go to work in the second and third shifts. The streets of many settlements of the region emptied after dark. In the current situation, the disclosure of the murders of women in the Vitebsk region was taken over by the Central Committee of the CPSU. More than 100 employees of all law enforcement agencies of the BSSR and other republics of the USSR, including from the Prosecutor General's office and the KGB, were sent to the region. The Minister of Internal Affairs of the BSSR, Viktor Piskarev, decided to strengthen the personnel of the Department of Internal Affairs of the Vitebsk Regional Executive Committee, whose chief in January 1985 was appointed Mechyislav Grib, who headed the investigation of the murders of women in the region. Nikolai Ignatovich, an investigator for particularly important cases of the Prosecutor's Office of the BSSR, having studied the cases of the murders of women in the region, assumed that all crimes were committed by one person, and achieved the unification of all cases into one. During the investigation, a version was expressed that the criminal drives a car, which was confirmed by the testimony of witnesses who saw how the future victims of the maniac got into a red Zaporozhets, or a technical assistance, car. Checks of cars of the given brand and type and their drivers have begun in the region. As a people's vigilante, Mikhasevich himself took part in these inspections. During 1984 to 1985, along the way, 221 crimes were solved in the Vitebsk region, including 27 murders, 17 facts of intentional infliction of grievous bodily harm, 14 robberies and robberies, 93 thefts, 479 criminals were arrested, 186 missing persons were found, 7 unregistered firearms were seized. Wishing to direct the investigation on the wrong path, Mikhasevich anonymously sent a letter to the acting editor-in-chief of the newspaper, Vitebsk Worker, Romanovsky, on behalf of the mythical anti-Soviet organization, Patriots of Vitebsk, on August 16, 1985. The letter was immediately handed over to the regional department of the KGB. Initially, no serious importance was attached to it. However, in the autumn of 1985, Mikhasevich killed 2 women, on September 5 near the village of Gamzalevo, Polotsk district, on October 27 near the village of Pavlovichi, Vitebsk district, he abused and strangled the victim with her own headscarf. The maniac put a note in the girl's mouth. Graphological examination showed that the letter to the editorial office of the newspaper, Vitebsk Worker, and the note found at the scene of the last murder were written by the same person. The inspection of almost the entire adult population of the region has begun. Graphology experts from the KGB checked 556,000 handwriting. On November 25, checking the drivers of the red Zaporozhets, the district inspector of the Polotsk police department Valery Veretennikov took a written explanation from Mikhasevich. As a result, the investigation was able to calculate the maniac by handwriting. On December 8, it was decided to detain the criminal, but the operatives who arrived at his home in the evening did not find him on the spot. On December 9, they found out at his work that he had taken a vacation and was going to fly away on vacation with his family. In the evening of the same day, the maniac was arrested at the house of his wife's brother in the village of Gorieny, Polotsk district. He had packed things for the whole family, as well as 4 plane tickets to Odessa. During a search of Mikhasevich's house, some of the belongings of the women he killed were found. On December 11, the criminal began to testify. During interrogations and investigative experiments, he told in detail about the circumstances of each crime, indicated the places where he committed them, hid the bodies and belongings of the victims. In addition to the already known victims, the remains of 5 women who were reported missing in 1981 to 1984 were found in the places indicated by him. In total, the maniac confessed to 43 murders. According to the investigators who interrogated the maniac, Mikhasevich did not repent of what he had done. The criminal was clearly flattered by the attention to his person. He passionately told all the details of his crimes, often laughed and made jokes about his victims and law enforcement officers. During one of the investigative experiments, when asked by the investigator whether he had sexual contact with the victim, Mikhasevich replied with a laugh that he did not remember, since it was much more interesting for him to strangle her. During one of the interrogations, the killer confessed that he had almost strangled his own wife twice, the first time during intimacy, the second time during a quarrel, but managed to control himself by washing with cold water from the tap. According to the criminal, his wife was of little interest to him, and he practically did not communicate with her in everyday life, except that he helped with the housework. About the motives that pushed him to commit crimes, he replied as follows: "From time to time, when I was alone with myself, some kind of state came over me, which prompted me to seek out a woman, in order to first communicate with her, touch her body, try to have sexual intercourse with her. When I came into contact with a woman, I was seized by some kind of insanity in which I crushed and killed women. I believed that a woman should definitely be crushed, and in such cases I could not help myself. After the murder, I was relieved. I did not regret what I had done." The investigation was conducted for more than a year. 227 witnesses were interrogated, 60 types of material evidence were attached. The materials collected by the investigation fit into 173 volumes of the criminal case. It was possible to prove the involvement of Mikhasevich in 36 murders and 1 attempted murder. The conclusion of the psychiatric examination conducted at the V.P. Serbsky Research Institute of General and Forensic Psychiatry stated, Mikhasevich does not suffer from a mental illness, he has psychopathic character traits and a tendency to sexual perversions. These personality traits are accompanied by the presence of sexual perversions in the form of sadism, are not accompanied by disorders of thinking, memory, emotionality and criticism. During the period relating to the acts incriminated to him, there were no signs of any painful disorder of mental activity in Mikhasevich. He could be aware of his actions and direct them. He should be considered sane. The trial of Gennady Mikhasevich took place in Minsk from April 14 to May 19, 1987. The Judicial Board for Criminal Cases of the Supreme Court of the USSR, chaired by Judge Fedor Savkin, sentenced him to death. In the last word at the trial, Mikhasevich did not repent of committing the murders. He refused to file a petition for clemency. The letter sent to the Supreme Court of the BSSR to the mother of the maniac with a request for his pardon was left without satisfaction. The sentence was carried out on September 25, 1987, according to other sources, on January 19 or February 3, 1988, in the Pishilovsky Castle. The main responsibility for the innocent convicts was assigned to the investigator for particularly important cases of the prosecutor's office of the BSSR Mikhail Kuzmich Savnarovic, who leads most of the cases. Besides him, about 200 more employees of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the BSSR were brought to justice after the capture of the maniac. One investigator, having learned about the charges against him, committed suicide. The real responsibility was borne only by the prosecutor of the Transport Prosecutor's Office of the BSSR, Valery Sirocco, who was sentenced to 4 years in prison, and several other law enforcement officers received suspended prison terms from 2 to 2.5 years. The rest got off with only reprimands, demotions in ranks and positions, dismissals from law enforcement agencies, exclusion from the CPSU. Zavnarovic himself, the main person involved in the criminal case of abuse of official powers, actually did not bear any responsibility. In November 1987, in connection with the amnesty on the occasion of the 70th anniversary of the October Revolution, the criminal case against Zavnarovic was terminated, and he himself was retired with the preservation of all titles and awards. Shortly after retiring, Zavnarovic died.